Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday morning, afternoon, or possibly even Saturday morning for some of you. Somewhere, I don't know. Is it Saturday for some of you? It might be. But if you are tuning in live here on Behance today, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. It definitely feels like a 47 cup of coffee type of day. It's one of those Fridays. Woke up feeling exhausted, but I'm excited to be back here on this Friday morning, tackling the last challenge for this week. And it's gonna be a fun one. So before we dive into things, good morning to Sam and Steve and Mercurial and Susan, Carol, Etor. If I mispronounced your name, I do apologize. Stony, great to see all of you. Hey, Rick. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hop over to my screen. We're going to dive in pretty quickly because we do have a lot to cover today. So head on over to behance.net/challenge/Photoshop. Rick from Toronto, my hometown. Great to see you, fellow Canadians. If you haven't pressed that big blue register button at the top yet, definitely press it so you're notified when new challenges are released. And every single day you'll receive a challenge, Monday to Friday, except that first Monday. You can join us in our Discord community chat. If I hop over there, boop, there it is. And a lot of you have already been, look at this. Look at this T-Rex with this glowing thing. He's even got like spirals. I don't know what these are. Maybe they're slinkies. I don't know. But amazing stuff. I love watching all of you take these challenges to all new levels. Musician with some glowing effects, more glowing effects here. Super cool. Seems like a lot of you are really liking the glow effects one. What would be kind of cool is once we get through all these challenges, even though they don't build upon each other, just kind of, take little bits and pieces from all of them and stick them together. Just put glowing triangles and everything. So definitely hop into Discord, submit your work. We have some great moderators and mentors in there all the time giving feedback. It's a wonderful community. You can watch us live. I'm live 9 o'clock Pacific time during these challenges. Also, I'll be live in just a few hours from now with an XD masterclass if any of you are into XD. And then you can share your work like I showed you on Discord or Behance using the keyword PS Daily Challenge. All right, so we started the week with Select and Mask. We moved on to the wonderful glow effects using layer styles, which we're also going to be covering today. We went on to photo editing. We decluttered photographs with unwanted objects using various healing tools. And then today we're going to be designing stylized text. It's going to be a lot of fun. So go ahead and hit that Get Started button right down here. You can rewatch the video later on if you want to. But let's go ahead and hop over to Photoshop. Right over here. And this is the template for today. So let me go ahead and zoom into the welcome card on the left. And again, today's challenge is to create sort of like a 3D or stylized text for a video game or design project using layer styles and textures if you'd like. And then over to the right, I've included some inspiration, and I included also the artist links over here on the card on the left. So you can kind of get an idea of what we're going to be going for. We're probably not going to be going this crazy because honestly, this probably takes a little bit more than 25 minutes, but hopefully I can set you up on the right path and you can create something kind of cool over the weekend or into next week as well. All right, so we have this artboard down here at the bottom, and the first thing I want to do is start to add some color to this artboard because designing on white is a little bit boring, right? Now there's a few ways to add some color onto this artboard. We can either choose a color within our tools bar to the left and then, fill it in with holding that Alt option and then pressing, I should probably select this artboard. And if you have a rectangle, you can draw out a shape like that and it'll fill it in, right? Or what you can do, you can grab your paint bucket tool. Where is it? There we go. We have a gradient tool, paint bucket tool. You can use those as well. But one thing I kind of like to do is use layer styles even for things like, backgrounds and stuff like that. Now, if you were working with a standard document, not an artboard, you can apply it to the background layer. but we don't have that. So in the properties panel over here to the right, we can choose other, we can choose a color directly here, but I might want a bit of a gradient. So I'm actually gonna go back to that rectangle. I'm gonna draw one out like that. And then if I double click on this rectangle, I can access my layer styles. And very quickly, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'm going to add a bit of a gradient overlay. I do have some settings from my previous testing, and essentially I just chose a radial gradient and then 2 colors with the lighter color in the middle and a darker color on the edges. Nothing too crazy, and we are definitely going to be getting into layer styles in just a moment. All right. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to just pull this corner radius back, is we want to start by adding some text. So I'm going to grab my text tool, shortcut key T, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to just type out my name. I'm going to make this quite a bit bigger. So I'm going to either, at the top with the text selected, I can choose a value right up here, or I can transform it, Command and Control T, and then drag it on up, right? Let me enter a value up here. Let's try around 495, somewhere in that area, and pop it straight in the middle. Now, you might be wondering about the text that I'm using. So essentially what you want if you want to follow along, you want a nice rounded text. And if you don't have any installed on your computer, what I would recommend is hopping over to fonts.adobe.com, go to Browse Fonts, and then you can really start to dial in which fonts and typefaces you're looking for. So in this case, I do want rounded. So on the left-hand side, I can choose rounded. I can also enter some sample text right up here. And then you can just browse through all these different typefaces. I believe the one I'm using right now is this one, Julia. It's a kind of a fun typeface. They also have a few different styles as well. So definitely browse through Adobe Fonts, sync those fonts over to your computer, and then you'll be able to use them immediately in Photoshop. All right, so we have our base text ready to go. It's looking pretty good, but we want to really start amping it up with some layer styles. So I'm going to double click on this layer like we showed in the glow effect tutorial or challenge. I'm going to double click right there. And we have all these different layer styles that we can start adding in. Usually I go from the top to the bottom, but I want to start with a gradient overlay. This will really it'll really help set the tone for the overall text. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hop into the style section, and I'm going to switch this over to linear, and I might just want it to go, angle of 0, so it goes left to right. And then I can pop open the color picker. And this is where I can start adding some colors to start bringing this to life. So the left-hand side, we might want to go for, somewhat of a lighter blue. We're going to go for some pretty bright colors for this particular text. And then we might want to transition. I'm just clicking and dragging to set a location. Maybe we'll go for either a yellow or an orange. That's a nice color right about there. And then maybe we'll go for a purple, possibly. Maybe I'll darken this one a little bit. And one of the benefits of using layer styles and things like, I just saw someone's comment about Comic Sans. No Comic Sans today. One of the benefits of using layer styles is that you can always go back and make changes. So as we're going through this process, we can very easily hop back into the gradient overlay and then make some tweaks. And we'll end up with maybe like a greenish color up here. Now at the moment, this pink and purple is kind of blending in a little bit with the background, and that's totally fine because once we start adding some additional styles, it'll all kind of make sense. All right, so we have our gradient overlay in place. Now let's go ahead and just go top to bottom, and we're gonna start adding some layer styles. And the first one we're gonna add is bevel and emboss. And this one is interesting because not only is it gonna help us, really add some shape and depth to this particular text, but if you just leave it at the default settings, it looks a bit strange. So you really want to take some time and dial in your settings for this, right? So definitely experiment because there's a lot of settings here. I'm going to switch the style to emboss, and then we're going to start experimenting with some of the techniques and depth and things like that. So let's go ahead and bump up the depth. Let's try around 250. Now I will mention that depending on the size of your text, right now my text is around 500. If yours is 50 or 1000, right? The settings that I'm entering in here, you will have to make changes to, because a lot of this is dependent on the size of that text. So depth of 250 looks okay. Let's increase the size a little bit to kind of push it inwards. And you're already starting to see, even though it's not looking that great right now, but you're kind of starting to see, let me actually zoom in here. There we go. We're adding some depth. It's not there yet. It still looks a bit cheesy, but it's getting there, right? Another thing I might want to do is experiment with the gloss contours and the angles and altitudes. This will really start to put some polish on your text. So what I kind of recommend is just clicking on one of them and then just using your arrow keys to kind of sift through the various options. That's kind of cool, right? And we hardly have done anything, right? Which is nice. So I'm gonna leave it right around there. I'm gonna turn off global light. And if you don't know what global light is, it essentially locks your lighting in throughout all your layer styles. So if you have global light turned on, then all of your layer styles that have lighting effects will use that exact setting, which we may not want in this case. So I'm also going to experiment with the lighting directions and the altitude and things like that until I get an interesting result. And again, the other layer styles that we're going to be adding are definitely going to be adding on to this. Freaky Friday. Hey Frank, great to see you. Can we round the text like an Illustrator? I don't believe, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, but there are ways to like curve the text. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about, but yeah, I'll take a look afterwards. Okay, so going down, let's go ahead and experiment with some highlight modes and things like that. I'm a big fan of overlay and soft light for these areas. It's a little bit softer. It's not as harsh as something like screen. And I might want to do the same thing for our shadow mode as well. Just switch it over to overlay or soft light. Gives a nice softer effect. All right, it's looking okay. Bruce says it's looking good. It's getting there. And that's the thing with layer styles, and especially bevel and emboss, is at first it just won't look that great, but once you start adding more and more and more, it'll start to kind of build up on each other. And contour might help as well. So when you add that, you're not going to really see much because the default contour doesn't do a lot. But again, like the gloss contours, just click on one and then just use the arrow keys to kind of go through and see which one might look best. And these ones here, you can kind of see it adds a nice little contour and ridges around it, but you're also noticing it's a little bit harsh, right? Now there is an option right over here called anti-alias. If you turn that on, all of a sudden it smooths it out really nicely. So don't forget that that option exists. There is that option also in the gloss contour section, which will also help a little bit as well, right? All right, so it's getting there. The more you add, the more you add. Indeed, Norsh. All right, so contour is looking pretty good. And now we can move on to things like strokes, which essentially is an outline around your object or on the inside of your object. In this case, we're gonna be adding one on the inside. So I'm gonna bump up the size. Let's try about 10. And we might wanna go for something like possibly overlay, because we want this stroke to kind of blend in with the actual text layers. Now, what you might be noticing if I change this to, let's say, gradient, and then possibly on the top we might want white, and then the bottom maybe a darker color somewhere around here. Should probably reverse that, I think. It's okay, it'll do. Now you might be noticing it might not be doing what you might expect, and that could be because overprint is not selected. So if we turn that on, then it's going to apply that stroke on top of the actual contents of the text. So the gradient overlay and the bevel emboss will affect that stroke. So if I turn that off and then back on, you can see that it's now being applied to that text, which looks pretty good, right? Again, experiment and see what works best for your text. All right, moving on down, let's go ahead and add a little bit of an inner shadow just to give a little bit of depth on the inside of this text. Now we want to keep this one fairly simple, so we're gonna change the color to black. Blend mode, soft light or overlay could work. And then I'm gonna bump up the distance a little bit, not too much, just a little bit. And I might even bump up the size a touch as well. And then I might not need a contour on this one, so I'll just reset it back to its original. And size essentially is blur. So if you want more of a blurry text or blurry shadow, definitely increase the size a little bit. And I'm gonna drop the opacity somewhere around 50% possibly. And that just adds, if I turn this off and then on, just add the little bit of depth in there. And if I increase the distance a little bit more, right, you'll notice it almost looks like there's a nice ridge on the top of that text. So again, experiment and see what works best. All right, inner glow. Let's move on to there. So for this one, we might want either the edges of this text or the center of the text to be a little bit brighter. Just to give more depth, maybe make it shine a little bit. If you're going for like a candy kind of feel, this will definitely help. So again, I'm gonna change the blend mode to something like soft lighter overlay. Those tend to work best for, whiter colors like this. Opacity looks pretty good around 35, but we're not really seeing much going on right now, right? If I turn it off and back on, not seeing much. So what I might want to do is, increase things like the size, for example, and you're noticing that's kind of pushing it inwards a bit, which is already looking kind of nice. But then you can experiment with things like choke. Let's bump that up a little bit, maybe around 40. And then down here, you can also experiment with the contours. Again, select one, and then just kind of cycle through and see what works best. And then range, we might want to bring that in a little bit. There we go. So we have a little bit of a glow on the inside of this text layer. It's kind of getting there, but it still looks a little bit strange. Now, another way to add shine and finish is by adding a satin effect. A lot of people don't know what satin is. I still don't fully understand what it is, but essentially it adds, here's one way to kind of figure it out. So if you change the color to, let's say, white, we'll change it to overlay like the other ones, bump up the opacity to 100%, crank down the size to 0, and then increase the distance a little bit, you can kind of see what satin is doing, right? It's adding these interesting patterns on the inside, and then as you increase the size, then it's gonna blur a little bit and add these almost like reflections in there, right? So if I go ahead and, let's say, drop the opacity down to maybe 60, maybe experiment with the angle a little bit, bump up the distance, and then maybe bump up the size a touch as well, right? All of a sudden we're adding kind of these nice shines. And then you can use that in replacement of inner glow if you want to, or you can use those kind of together, right? And then just like with all the other layer styles, experiment with some contours. You can invert it if you want to, so it's not as harsh. And there we go. It's looking interesting, right? So there's without the inner glow. There's just the satin, no satin, inner glow, and then satin. So it's just kind of building upon each other. It might be a little bit overdone, but it could work, right? All right, so now that we've tackled all of the layer styles up here, we're gonna add a drop shadow. Actually, we're gonna add 5 drop shadows because we can, right? So the first drop shadow we're gonna be adding is gonna be fairly simple. It's gonna be just a little bit of a drop shadow to separate the text from the other drop shadows we're gonna be adding. And this will be a very simple one. So we're gonna switch over to normal, and we're gonna choose a color, like let's say a pink, somewhere right about here, right? And then what we're gonna do is we can bump up the opacity a little bit. Something, I don't know, somewhere around 60%, looks pretty good. And then we might want to experiment with the angles of the lighting, or angles of the shadow, I should say. I guess it would be caused by the lighting. Bring it down, and then we want to probably take the size down to 0, so we have a nice sharp shadow, just like this. Now at the moment, it's a little bit difficult to see because it is blending in with that background, but because we're going to be adding a few extra shadows, we'll be able to see it quite nicely afterwards. All right, so to add an additional shadow, what we want to do is press that plus button right over here to the right beside drop shadow. And then for this one, we essentially want it's almost like a stroke around the text. So we're going to be using a shadow to kind of add a stroke. So I'm going to bump up the opacity all the way to 100%. We can keep the angle, don't have to worry too much about that, but we're going to bump the distance down quite a bit, somewhere around 4. And then we really want to bump the spread up, and that's going to allow that shadow, once we increase the size in just a moment, it's going to allow that shadow to kind of encompass the entire text. So if I bump up the size, as you're seeing right there, right? It's now kind of taking over the text. Now it's a little bit harsh at the moment, so definitely experiment with some options and your settings. Again, you can also experiment with the contours. Some of them will work better than others, some of them might not be necessary, so definitely experiment a little bit, right? Let's try about 35. We'll go for that for now. And then the next one we're gonna add one more shadow down here. This one's gonna be a little bit lighter, so I'm gonna switch over to more of a lighter pink, somewhere in this area here. Bump down the opacity. Let's try about 70%. And then this will act as almost like a very light border around this pink shape that we just created, right? So we're gonna bump up the size a little bit. Let's experiment with the contours. And again, a lot of this is just experimentation. Just testing out what works and what doesn't work. Whoops, there we go. Right, so you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a ridge on there, which will look nice, especially once we add our next shadow. We're just gonna add all the different shadows, right? I don't know how many shadows you can add, but we're gonna keep going. All right, so this one here is gonna be basically another outline. So we're gonna bump up the opacity one more time. Let's change this back to a more vibrant color. Bump up the distance a little bit. Let's crank up that spread. And we'll reset the contour. And again, it's just adding a little bit of a ridge down there, and you can definitely experiment with distance and things like that to get the exact result you're looking for. Maybe this one will be a little bit darker because it is more of a shadow. You know, the edges are looking a little bit rough right now, but those are things you can definitely work with. And also, depending on the text that you use, the actual typeface, that will change as well. And then one more shadow. This is going to be more of a traditional shadow that will just help separate all of our text from the background. So for this one, we're going to actually switch over to multiply, and we're going to darken this quite a bit. And then we'll stick with the same angle just so everything is pretty consistent. We're going to bump up the distance. Now the spread we don't want at 100% because we don't want it so sharp, right? So we're going to drop this, I don't know, somewhere around 30 possibly. And then the size, we can definitely bump that up so that we have a nice soft shadow. And then we can drop the opacity. And then things are coming together. And then at this point, this is where you really want to go back through your shadows and through all of the different layer styles and just make some tweaks, right? Just adjust this a little bit, maybe adjust all of these, adjust the opacity. This one here probably needs a little bit of tweaking so it's not too harsh. Maybe I'll bump up the spread a little bit and then drop the size a touch. Something like that. And then the gradient, so again, the satin and the inner glow might be a little bit overdone. So definitely go through and, okay. So this one might look better without the additional inner glow or with a different inner glow, right? So again, it's all about experimentation, seeing what works best, tweaking these settings a little bit. There we go. Whoop, no, wrong way. There we go. Maybe bump this down a touch so there's a little bit of an edge on there. There we go. That's looking a little bit better, right? Perfect. All right, this one is looking pretty good. Again, the edges are a little bit harsh, but not too bad. And then this one over here, I might want a little bit more of a shadow at the bottom. I might want to darken that just a touch as well, just to add a little bit more depth there. There we go. All right, I'm pretty happy with this. It's getting there. It's, you know, for 25 minutes or so, it's not great, but it's also not bad. And I'm really excited to see what all of you do in the next few days as you work on this challenge. But I can just sit here for hours and days and just kind of tweak this to my liking. But, you know, there we go. With just a bunch of layer styles and a lot of drop shadows, we've created this fun stylized text that hopefully has given you all some inspiration on how you're gonna go about this. So definitely submit your work in Discord when you can. Have fun with this challenge. And who's coming up next? Let's take a quick peek at the schedule. Looks like we have, where is the schedule? Paul Traney is coming up with his Photoshop masterclass, so definitely don't miss that. Maybe he'll cover some text effects, I'm not sure. But a big thank you to everyone who has tuned in this week. I'm gonna be back next week with 5 more challenges. And also for my XD viewers, I'll be back in just a few hours with my masterclass. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you all next time.